you get a little bit older, you become a little bit more discerning about what you're reading, a little bit more critical of what you're reading. So, but as a teenager, that was my shit. Look, I'm not coming here to be like, hey, here's the first book that ever made me feel horny. That's not what I'm trying to say. Look, for today's video, instead of discussing recent books that I've read, I thought it would be kind of fun to assess the timeline, the pipeline, if you will, of how we got here. There's a lot of books that have left a mark on me in some way throughout my life, but I was able to narrow it down to 10 different books. And I really think you can see the descent into madness that has befallen me. But also, I bet a lot of you guys, if you've been a reader for a good chunk of time, that you can probably look back and remember the different books that really left an impression on you, that really changed you as a person. And so I thought it would be kind of fun to just reflect on my list today. But before we get started, if you just want to skip ahead to the books and you don't want to hear any personal mumbo jumbo, go ahead and skip ahead to the time. I'll put it on the screen somewhere. Now, after my last video, it seemed that there were at least a few people who were interested in a public Goodreads. So I did decide to make one. I will have it linked in the description if you're interested in following me or being friends or whatever, however that works. I'm probably not going to leave reviews on every book that I read, but I will rate every book. Although I will say 5 stars simply is not enough stars. The vast majority of the books are going to be 3 stars because there's just not... I need more stars. You get what I'm saying. But yeah, if you're on there, you'll get a little sneak peek into some of the books I'll be talking about in future videos. And if you ever want to recommend a book, you can certainly always just comment it on a YouTube video. But I know some people aren't really comfortable doing that. So if you ever did want to recommend a book, then you can do that through Goodreads without having to talk to me at all. So that's in the description. And then also, I figured, what the hell, why not? My husband has been encouraging me to make an Instagram for my channel for some time. So I figured it's, I'm making a Goodreads, why not try to make an Instagram, a bookstagram? So that will also be linked in the description. If you're on Instagram and you want to be mutuals or something, just let me know. I'll be honest, I don't really know. The bookstagram is so... I don't know, it's just really different. It's kind of its own unique ecosystem over there, and it's very different from YouTube. So I don't really know if I'm gonna fit in over there really, but I figure I'm not gonna worry about it too much. I'm just gonna kind of do my own thing. And if you're interested in, again, maybe getting a little preview about what books are coming up, maybe quotes I like from certain books, or, maybe I'll kind of try to throw together some lists, just behind the scenes things a little bit. Nothing too fancy, pictures of my dog, things like that. I decided to make my first post right before I'm uploading this video. So if you want to see, I thought something that would be kind of fun would be to share some of my rejected thumbnail attempts. So if you want to see a rejected thumbnail attempt by me, that was my most disappointing, that I couldn't make it work, then, you can go over there. That's the first post that I made on there. At the time of this filming, I currently have 1 follower. And shout out to Klaus Kenyon if he sees this, because he followed me back like the nice guy that he is. It's just Scare-o-lyn still, but I had to use a 0 instead of an O because somebody already has Scare-o-lyn on Instagram. But yeah, so if you guys are interested in either one of those things, they are... I feel really weird saying they're linked in the description, but they are. That's where they are, so have it. Now, this is not in order of importance. I'm quite literally going in chronological order. The top 10 books that would best summarize my life. First up is the first book that I ever read. So this is called my Goodnight book. This is the first book, the literal physical copy of the first book that I was ever able to read by myself. It says pictures by Eloise Wilkin, but is she also the author? This is copyright 1981. Ooh, baby. Eloise Wilkin is the only name on this book, so I'm assuming that's also the author. But you can imagine, when I was a little girl, I'm one of those people that when I was little, my hair was blonde and then it kind of turned brown as I got older. But you can imagine, when I was little, I kind of looked like this. So I really thought that this was like my book. It's just, like a nighttime routine. It's like, hey, take a bath, you dirty little freak. Brush your teeth. Get read a bedtime story. Get tucked into bed, say your prayers, and say goodnight. My father passed away a few years ago now. And so when he died, I'll probably be talking about him again in this video. But this is something that he still had. And so I got it. Obviously significance to knowing and actually kind of remembering the first time that I read it by myself out loud. And then I got so excited that I got through the whole thing that I ran. I don't remember who I ran to, if it was my mom or my dad or maybe even my grandma. But I ran to somebody and said, like, I can read the whole thing. Let me prove it. And then I did. So this, my Goodnight book, is where... It's just where it all started. Unfortunately, I do not have a physical copy of this next book anymore, but I wouldn't put it past myself to get one, just for the nostalgia of it. I already did that with a different book for this video. The next book is called Companions of the Night, and it is by Vivian Van Velde. Now, why is this book significant? Need to explain. I don't remember exactly how old I was when I read this. Maybe 9. 9 was a rough age for me. I'll be real with you. Puberty just hit me like a brick wall at the age of 9. And so it was an awkward time. I'm willing to bet that I read this around that age. So this was kind of like my Twilight. I just remember that there was a girl and that there was vampires involved and how it made me feel. That was all I remembered. But I'll give you a vague plot. There's a teenage girl named Carrie. She goes to a laundromat. I think she's running back there because her little brother left his stuffed animal or something like that. But when she goes there in the night, she runs into a situation where there's this dude who's in some trouble. And she makes the decision to try to help this man who is being pursued by who she's under the impression are the bad guys. So everyone's a vampire. Yeah, he was injured. There was an injured man at the laundromat, and so she wants to try to help him, and she just gets wrapped up into this world of danger and violence and chaos, and there's vampires. I loved this story. Now, I need you to understand, when I say this was like my Twilight, it's literally just because there were vampires. The way that I remembered it and the way that it's described on Google, the vampires aren't written to be romantic. It's like there's a romance that happens despite the fact that the vampires are vampires and there's the guy's scary and whatnot. But when I tell you, it did something. It did something. It was the first book that I ever remembered kind of triggering like a fantasy, if that makes sense. I just imagined this romance and there was so much excitement and it was, it's like again, I don't know how old that was, but a 9-10-year-old, I'm guessing. This feels like perhaps too complex of an emotion for a child to have, but perhaps sort of like a longing, sort of. This was like, okay, I know how to compare this. Millennial women, rise. We need to talk about Casper. If you've seen the movie Casper, millennial women, I know you have, and I know you know where I'm going with this. Okay, but if you don't know, keep up. In the movie Casper, there is a moment with Christina Ricci and Devon Sawa, who's playing the human boy Casper. And at the end of the movie, they're dancing and some stuff goes down. And they have this moment where they're like super close to each other. And then Devon Sawa, as Casper, leans into Christina Ricci. And he's like, "Can I keep you?" I don't know if the mic's going to pick it up if I whisper, but he whispers it very gently. He's like, "Can I keep you?" I still think about that to this day. And I'm not the only one. I cannot tell you, I've seen other people talk about it, and I was delighted to know that I was not the only one that that had an effect on, okay? If you think about it, a man, a grown man, asking you to marry him, it's sort of like him asking if he can keep you. You know, it's like, yes, thank you for asking first. And so if you've seen that movie and you know how that moment, horny isn't the right word, but like longing or just something something along those lines of just, oh, maybe boys don't have cooties, whatever emotion that is. And Companions of the Night is the first book that ever made me feel that way, where I was like, I want to pretend to be Carrie and to have this boy, and so it's special to me for that reason. A very important moment in a young girl's life. Next up, I actually purchased, I didn't still have this, but I purchased it. This is Bad Dreams by R.L. Stine. It is a Fear Street book. Now, I purchased this because I just remembered how much I liked Fear Street books when I was younger. I know Goosebumps is the more popular series, but I was a Fear Street girl. And in particular, this book was my favorite that I read. I didn't read all of them, but it was the one that I remembered because it is the first book that I ever remember as, you know, not like a little kid who keeps hearing the same bedtime story at night, but this was the first book that I ever liked it so much that I just went back and read it again right away. That feeling of, I like this so much, I already know what's going to happen. And yet, you know, like that sort of feeling. I purchased this because I kind of wanted to take a trip down memory lane. But I don't know. I don't know if that's something any of you guys would really care about. If it's not nostalgic for you, then you probably wouldn't care that much. Maybe that's the sort of thing I can post about on Instagram or something, you know, just about my little throwback nostalgia moments. But this book specifically, every night Maggie Travers has the same horrible dream. Every night she is forced to watch the same murder. And every night the girl in her dream cries out for help. Maggie is afraid to go to sleep again. But when the terrifying dream starts to come true and the gruesome accidents begin, staying awake is the real nightmare. And again, I didn't really remember the plot of this very well. I just remembered the way it made me feel. This is on the list not just because it's the first one I remember specifically rereading after I was not a toddler, you know. I'm listing this one specifically, but it does also kind of represent the Fear Street days. Companions of the Night had horror elements, certainly with it being vampires and whatnot, but like the Fear Street series was a child's introduction into horror, you know? And I don't know why it was Fear Street for me instead of Goosebumps. My sister really liked Goosebumps at the time, and so maybe I was just trying to be different. Younger sister syndrome or something, I don't know. Okay, so we have a little bit of a departure here that is not horror at all, but it belongs on this list. You'll understand. The Lighthouse Keeper by James Michael Pratt. And I'll give you a little synopsis of the plot before I explain why it's on my list. This is one of those stories that is jumping back and forth in time. So you have this old man who is a lighthouse keeper, but he's, you know, not for long sort of thing, you know, like he's getting pretty old. And he's telling his daughter his story. And then we jump back in time to when he was younger. His family was killed in a car accident when he was young, and he ended up getting sent to live with his uncle, who was the lighthouse keeper at the time. And from that point, his life, between getting married, having children, and all of these things happening, and being sent off to war, jumping back and forth in time between current day as he's kind of telling his story to his daughter, and all these memories that he's had throughout a rather tumultuous and dramatic lifetime. Why is this on the list? Well, my father, like I mentioned before, he passed away a few years ago now, but he was always a reader. When he passed away, he did leave me his books. Unfortunately, it's been a little bit complicated, so I haven't been able to get all of them, but this is a book that I already had because he recommended this to me when I was still a kid. It kind of felt like my first real adult book, and it is the first book that I ever remember making me cry. It has that significant memory for me, the first time a book caused that sort of reaction. Because I was a kid, I was not as careful with his book as I should have been, and I accidentally, I don't know if you can see it, there's like a hole. He let me keep the copy that I messed up, and he had to buy himself a new one. But that was a lesson for me from my dad about taking better care of my books. And I'll admit, I'm not somebody who, I'll bend corners. I don't treat books like precious things that shouldn't look used. That's still not my perspective, but I certainly would never do something like that again. I would take an attempt to protect the outside of the book, I guess, if that makes sense, even if I make notes or turn the corners on the inside. It holds that special place for me, not just the memory of crying for the first time, but obviously makes me think of my dad. It's something that I've thought about because I do have a couple of boxes of his books. He wasn't really into horror, though. Like I mentioned, all these, or most of these Stephen King books were my mom's. My dad was more into romances and like dramas and stuff. And he liked James Michael Pratt and like Nicholas Sparks, stuff like that. So most of the books that he had aren't really things that would fit into this channel very well. There are a few that I think I could make the argument. And anyway, enough rambling about that. The point is this book, first book to ever make me cry, and just the connection with my dad is why this one will always be special to me. Now, next up, again, I don't remember the exact age when I read this, but this represents the series Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews. If you've somehow never heard of this is about, what are their names? The doll something? Oh, I hate it when it's not the description on the back. What are their names? You know what? If she's not going to put the description on the back, then I'm not going to give them names. I don't care. This is about a group of children who some shit goes down. The dad dies. That's it. Their father dies. And then the mom is like, we're freaking screwed. We, had this perfect life. And now that he's gone, I don't know what goes on. And they end up having to go back to live with her parents, who are very rich but very terrible people. They didn't like the father, and they didn't approve of their daughter being with him. I think it might have even been something where they were hiding from the grandfather that the kids were even there. Yeah, I think only the grandma actually knew the kids were there. They end up hiding the children in the attic, Flowers in the Attic. All of these kids, there's like an older girl and there's an older girl and an older boy whose names are mysteries because they refuse to put it onto the back of the goddamn book. Kathy and Christopher, I think. And then there's two younger siblings, another boy and another girl, I believe. And so it starts off with the mom is initially trying to convince that the grandma eventually to let the kids not have to stay in the attic, that it shouldn't just be her living this normal life in the rest of the house, trying to kind of, if I recall correctly, she's kind of trying to suck up to her dad a little bit, trying to slowly introduce the idea of there being 4 children. But over time, she kind of just starts to live her own life, and these kids are quite literally locked in the attic and they're just fed occasionally. But you can imagine these children being so incredibly isolated. It leaves them quite emotionally stunted. It's a drama, but the only thing that people really point out is that there is some incest in it. If you actually read the book, the incest it's not like, ooh, it's like, oh, it's sad. It's sad because you have like this teenage boy and this teenage girl, the two oldest siblings, who are going through puberty, who are getting older, who only see each other. Less of like a adult content fantasy and more of just a reaction to trauma. At the time, though, Flowers in the Attic, the reason why it's on this list and it had such an effect on me is because I was fully invested in this nonsense. I loved V.C. Andrews. I had this whole series. I had so many books by her. Like, she was the first person she was my Stephen King. I had so many. Every time I saw a new book in the store, I would get it just constantly. And so imagine my surprise when I was a little bit older, because at this point I'm a teenager. And I don't remember exactly how old I was when I found out the news that V.C. Andrews had been dead for a long time and that it was a shadow writer who had written the vast majority of her books. Like, I'm pretty sure V.C. Andrews wrote the original series of Flowers in the Attic, and then My Sweet Audrina. My Sweet Audrina is its own thing. Flowers in the Attic, there's a prequel called Garden of Shadows, I believe. I'm not even 100% sure if that was written by her or partially. I don't remember. That was news to me. It was some dude writing the stuff. But there was just always this common theme that he always stuck to, where there was rich people with a secret. That was kind of the theme. And there was always a young woman. I don't think the book was ever with a male protagonist. It was always a young woman, either a family with secrets or she's, a maid at this house where there's secret. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was just this kind of very specific genre that I just really enjoyed for a long time. And then at some point I kind of grew out of it. But my love and dedication to this author for so many years deserves a spot on this list. To the point, my husband bought this for me, The Woman Beyond the Attic. And this is all about her story, because there's all this stuff where she was disabled. And so she has this very interesting story of how her life and the struggles that she had as a disabled woman affected what she wrote and the way that she wrote, the subjects that she talked about. We'll never know what directions her writing might have taken if she hadn't died. And so we are just kind of limited to the shadow writer who continued to repackage the same kind of storyline a lot, but for a long time I loved that same storyline and I ate that shit up for years. I have so many V.C. Andrews books. Now look, if I'm going to talk about authors and books that had an impact on me, obviously I'm going to talk about a Stephen King book. Out of what I've read, Dolores Claiborne. I think that is still my favorite Stephen King book. Now, Dolores Claiborne is about a woman named Dolores Claiborne who is accused of murdering the woman that she was a caregiver for. There was some suspicious circumstances that were witnessed, and when she gets accused of that, the detective really has to stick up his ass because he is absolutely convinced that Dolores actually killed her husband however many years ago, but she got away with it. And so he's really got to stick up his butt about trying to not pin this murder on her, because I think he does believe that these are suspicious circumstances that this woman died. and so it's not completely coming out of nowhere, but he might have been more open to her explanation had there not been this previous relationship between them. Her daughter ends up coming home to try to help her not be accused of murder. And you find this revelation about her father and about what happened way back when he died. Her father died because he fell into a well. And so there's some visuals in this book with the well, and also that there is this scene with a eclipse. Yeah, there were just some powerful moments in the book that just really stuck with me, and so I felt like for this list, I can't not talk about the effect of Stephen King, and especially as somebody who reads so much horror now. I don't think, even if you're not a huge Stephen King fan, it's really hard not to acknowledge the impact that he's had on the genre and just what an important figure he's been for popularizing horror to the masses. And he's certainly more palatable than a lot of the extreme stuff that we talk about on this channel. But at the time, he was like that guy. Okay, next up is something I also do not have a physical copy of, but it is something that I've talked about on this channel. This is just sort of a vague shout out to the Expanse series, which is sci-fi, not so much horror, although the premise is horrifying. Now, of this series, the first book is called Leviathan Wakes, and it's by James S.A. Corey, which is a pen name for two men, actually, that write the books together. Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. I'm just going to focus on the first book. It is done in dual perspectives. You have this Detective Miller who is trying to investigate a missing girl who he believes might be involved in some sort of terrorism or just got involved with the wrong crowd. She kind of comes across as a bit of a young woman with a chip on her shoulder, just trying to get back at her rich parents for babying her too much, so she's going to rebel and get involved with some sort of dangerous group, but she's missing. And so he is investigating, looking into all of that. Meanwhile, there is a man named James Holden who he is on a ship. Again, this is a sci-fi. He's on a ship that's an ice hauler. Some stuff goes down. They find this ship that has been abandoned and regret checking it out. And these two stories and what they find on the ship and how just chaos, just all sorts of so much. Now, this series, I loved this series so much. It made me realize that I could not just understand sci-fi, but that I could be invested. I could love it. I could be craving it. And at some point, I don't know when, but at some point I'm going to do a video on this channel that is a sci-fi horror thing. Because I haven't explored sci-fi again in a while, but I want to, because this series, it's just incredibly well done. It's beautifully written, it's beautifully executed, and despite the fact that it is so many books, I don't remember how many books it even was. It's so many books, it's so long, but I was just so invested. And in every single book, there is always multiple perspectives that you're getting the story from. And sometimes it's the same ones. You see Holden, I believe, in all the books. I don't think there's any exceptions to that. So you always have Holden, but then the other characters, sometimes there's a lot. I think it just means a lot to me because of the realization I had about sci-fi as a genre, that I could understand it, that it wasn't inherently too complex for me. If you watched my last video, I talked a little bit about how one of the stories that I read felt like it was over my head and was too complex for me. And that made me feel disappointed and kind of frustrated. Like a series like The Expanse, that was the sort of thing that felt like a challenge, and it felt like it was complex, but I could understand it and I could follow along. And so it felt really good and really rewarding to go on that journey of that story. And so if you have any interest in sci-fi, that I would strongly encourage. I thought that the series was just absolutely wonderful. That was a 5-star for me. Every single book I gave a 5-star as far as I'm concerned. If you're concerned about it at all, I listened to the audio version of that, and it was narrated by a man. What was his name? It was narrated by a man that I was mildly obsessed with. Like, I just thought I loved his voice. I loved his narration. He was so good at doing the different voices in a way that didn't feel like hammed up, you know? Like, he just did such a good job. I'll put his name up because he deserves a shout out again. So, Expanse series, 10 out of 10. Next up, speaking of audiobooks, we're going to talk about Mary by Nat Cassidy. I originally listened to this book, but I loved it so much that I bought a physical copy because at some point, I don't know when, but at some point I want to reread it and I want to annotate it. Mary is a woman who is middle-aged and she is going through menopause, and it's a rough time, and as I've heard. So as she's struggling with all the side effects of menopause, she starts to experience other strange things. It goes beyond just hot flashes and things like that. It starts with her reflection is warping on her, and it's distorting, and it's freaking her the hell out. She's like, this doesn't seem like a normal symptom of menopause. And so that's how it starts. But then some more shit happens. I believe she gets fired from her job. She ends up having her aunt Nadine. Oh my God. She starts to witness other strange things. And you come to find out that it's like, oh, some of these weird ass thoughts that you're having in your head, it's actually really similar to this serial killer who used to exist. And so you get to discover what the hell is going on. What the hell is going on with Mary? Because it is a wild trip. The visuals in this, stunning. Loved it. I loved Mary's character. I loved the freaky weird shit that she was thinking and she was doing and she was witnessing. I loved this book. And so part of the reason it is on the list is just because I really fucking liked it. Now that I think about it, I think I actually did read this before I started the Expanse series. I do think so. You know, so I flipped the order of those on accident. My bad. But this really, it wasn't the first audiobook I ever listened to, but it was the first time where I was like, oh, I was having an experience. Like, I have a very distinct memory of, I had the day off of work. It was dark and stormy outside. I literally moved my chill chair so that it was looking out the window, and I just like sat in my chair in the dark facing the stormy window and was listening to this book in the dark. That was so enjoyable. Would recommend. If you have the day off and you're like, it's stormy outside, I'm gonna listen to fucking Mary. I'm gonna listen to this fucked up book. I'm just going to sit here and be fully engaged with what I'm hearing instead of, you know, what I normally do, which is like, oh, I'm getting ready for work and I have the book on while I'm showering or whatever, you know. But like that, just to be fully present and fully engaged with that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a genuine performance from this narrator. You know, like sometimes you listen to a book and it maybe not robotic, but it's, some narrators are better than others. And some narrators are really good at doing a character that sounds like them, but they can't do other voices, like especially opposite gendered voices, all of that stuff. Not all experiences are going to be the same, but audiobooks can be. I genuinely think that some books are better as an audio version than they are just listening to it. I don't know, man. It was one of those experiences. I felt like a world opened up to me. And that was at the point where I think I was like, oh, this is going to be a regular occurrence. Like, I'm going to start listening to audiobooks now. And so, yeah, I definitely listened to Mary before the Expanse series. So flip the order of those. But then, yeah, listening to that and then listening to the Expanse series by that narrator where I'm fully up his ass. Yeah, we still have 2 books left. But already we can see the descent from Fear Street books to Stephen King books to things like this. Already we're getting a little bit darker. My second to last book. Now look, this is not a horror book. To be honest, I feel a little bit weird bringing it up even because my impression is that this book kind of popped off over on TikTok. I'm just concerned that people hear that and they just kind of assume that it's, I don't want to say assume it's stupid, but they just aren't necessarily going to take it seriously. I think people tend to associate TikTok trends and stuff with kind of more trivial things. I don't know. But I am going to bring it up because if I had to be honest with you, this is my favorite book. My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. And you can see it is tabbed and it is heavily, heavily annotated inside. This book is about a woman named Vanessa. This is another example of we're jumping back and forth in time. When she's younger, she ends up becoming romantically involved with her teacher. And we jump ahead in time to when she is a young adult. And she comes to find out that this teacher is being accused by a different female student of being inappropriate with her. And so you have this experience of Vanessa, who is an adult now, who still had some semblance of a relationship with him, not romantic anymore because, you know, she was an adult, but she really did, her feelings were complex. It's something where she really did think that just because it didn't last and doesn't mean it wasn't love. And so she really did think that she was just special and that it wasn't that he was into kids and stuff. He liked her despite her age. And so for her to hear about a different student accusing him, it's just brings up very complex feelings for her. And this book, I thought it was incredibly powerful because you see the stuff that she's dealing with as an adult, trying to process, because her instinct, despite her experience, her instinct is to not believe the other woman. But she's like, no, like, she's probably exaggerating. She's you know, like, her instinct is to protect her memory as being something other than what it actually was. And it's fascinating to go back and forth in time because you see how, as an adult, how she remembers things. And how we jump back in time and we see how things actually happened. And you see how her memory is not accurate to what actually happened. And you see how he manipulated her memories and framed things in a way that tricked her or misled her into believing things were different. You know, because they maintained, even after their romantic relationship stopped working out or whatever, that there was a friendship there. So yeah, this story with looking at her complex feelings about what happened, trying to process what happened to her as a kid, trying to face the confusion of remembering things differently than they actually happened, the way that she's interpreting certain things. It's a very heavy read. I think particularly for anybody who has experience with these sorts of things, that this would be a very difficult read. I had mentioned this in a comment with somebody, I think in my Tampa video, somebody commented and mentioned this book. And I said, if you were going to read it, that you should read it after reading Lolita, because Lolita is kind of like the romanticized version from the perspective of the perpetrator. And then my Dark Vanessa, you see the impact of that sort of romanticization on the actual victim. I have never experienced a more visceral emotional reaction to a book than I did to this. But yeah, I guess that's all I'll say about that. So this, yeah, if I'm being honest, this is my favorite book. You are allowed to have your own opinions about it. But this is just one of those books that I've never really seeked out the opinions of others because it is special to me. And I just, if you've read it and you didn't like it, that's fair. I just don't want to hear about it. I just, there's no opinion that someone else could have about it that would really change how I perceive this book. So yeah, I guess I will leave that at that. Anyway, okay, so on to our final book on this crazy timeline that we've established. I thought it would only be appropriate to bring up an extreme horror book. So we're gonna go with His Pain by Rath James White. His Pain is about a young boy who has a medical condition. His senses are basically turned all the way up. A light whisper sounds extremely loud. A light touch is extremely painful. Food, it doesn't take much warmth for it to feel like it's scalding hot, like it's spicy or something. All of his senses are turned all the way up and to the point that he cannot live a normal life. He is constantly in pain, and his parents are doing the best that they can to try to keep him safe and protected in his room in this little... He had some sort of contraption even to sleep because, again, something touching him hurts. So he can't even lay down on a bed without being in pain. Everything hurts all the time. And then this guru guy is introduced to, what is his name? To Jason. His mother, I believe, stumbles across this guru guy who believes that he can help Jason. And so he tries to teach Jason how he can decide to not focus on the pain that he is physically feeling, that his mind is more powerful than the physical sensations that he's feeling. And the book has a whole lot of layers in it about how people cope and respond and use the pain that they experience in their life. And so I thought that this would be the most appropriate extreme horror book to bring up because it is the first one that I read that I think would be considered a splatterpunk. This is the first extreme horror book that I ever read that I saw layers of commentary in. And so I think for where I am now in my reading, it's like that's kind of my bread and butter. That's kind of my favorite thing to read and to kind of decipher. And so this being the first book where I realized that that was a thing. Look, I know that there's technically a difference between splatterpunk and extreme horror. I don't usually put a lot of time and effort into distinguishing between the two because if the basic idea of it is that extreme horror is just gross out gore and stuff for the sake of it, and splatterpunk is supposed to have a little bit more depth, more layers, more commentary, all of that stuff. I just don't see the value in being too picky about your terms because I just don't think even the author can decide how people are going to interpret their work. Even if the author wrote something with the intention of it not having any layers or depth to it, that doesn't mean a reader wouldn't find it, possibly. So I guess it's just one of those things that I think it's kind of subjective. And so while the terms do mean different things, I just don't see the point in being too nitpicky about the terms personally. But yeah, so I guess this was my first real introduction to splatterpunk, though it's opened up a whole new world to me, and I remember feeling particularly excited after I finished this book and the way that I felt after I read this book and just feeling really motivated to find more books like it. So, and that's kind of where we're leaving off. So to wrap this up, I guess that is kind of my life up until now in books. If you have certain books that are milestones in your life, I would love to hear your list. And if you remember the first book that made you cry, or a book that, I don't know, got you through your divorce or something. The books that have meant the most to you in the course of your life. I would love to know what your list is. Again, if you are interested in following me on Goodreads or on Instagram, it's in the description. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And maybe I'll see you the next time around. Bye! I was looking back So for the sake of simplicity, for the first, I'm not going to talk about the entire series. I'm just going to I'm just going to